Hey class, how are you? Sorry for being late on this lecture. This one's going to be a bit more kind of expansive, end of the semester-y. We're going to be covering a bunch of material from social media organizing to the general field of social media. This is the beginning of the end of the semester. We're basically at the very end, last few weeks to go. So this is the summation lectures. The end, you did it, you made it through a semester. But I also want to recognize that throughout the semester, it's been difficult. I understand that. I understand how difficult it's been to take a class during a pandemic again in another semester. And I also want to recognize that these systems aren't built for sustainable mental health and success at the same time, considering working with screens, being a screen-based audience, losing the ability to have in-person to person interactions is not the way I'm sure you thought college was going to go, nor take how this class was going to go. I've said this before and I'll say it again, this is not how I teach. I'm fluent in teaching online as I've started teaching online in 2011, but it isn't what I like to do. I am very much an in-person teacher. I don't really like speaking to a very small little lens and hoping that my voice translates to you for some sort of meaning or some in-depth sort of understanding. So today I want to kind of go over some of the bigger, more intricate parts of the way we live and the way we interact with social media and the way that we're kind of hoping to go forward as far as like society, class, education, and so forth. So there's a bit to cover, but I do want to recognize that I'm how much work you've put into this class and how proud I am of the work you've done. And really, I'm very, very, very pleased with that. Like, this is my second semester at Queens College, and I'm really proud and honored to say that I'll be here back in the fall for an entire year, teaching social media again and advertising aesthetics, which is really awesome. And I'll probably teach another master's class in the spring. So I'm really, really happy because Queens College students are incredible. I'm really privileged to have taught several schools, and I'm really happy that I've been able to teach great students everywhere I've been. So it's really fantastic. The work you guys have done and the work you've produced in this class is really stuff that's made me learn new things, experience information in a new way. So thank you for doing all that. So as we close down the class, as we get to the end, we're going to really be talking a lot about what we've learned. How did we get here? What are we taking with us past the ends of the walls of this class, past the Zoom borders or past the Substacks and Blackboards of our lives? What do we do with it in terms of how we use or how we do social media? So there's a couple things that I want to really check in with. First is a very clear understanding that the pandemic and remote learning has basically pushed us into a techno sphere of education, which isn't really the optimal way that colleges were designed or education was. And really what we notice is how important humans and humanism have been over the course of educational spaces. As we go into the future, there's three real topics I want to cover in this discussion, which is pessimism, realism, and optimism. The three different ways to look at social media in terms of organizing, usefulness, marketing, everything comes within those three places. And when you interact with social media, as you probably know by now, you interact within your echo chamber. Whether you like it or not, you've curated and created a feed of information that's specifically tuned to you. It isn't a feed for everybody. It's a feed that you look at that is unique from everybody else's. It's so unique, in fact, that if you were to make a search on a search engine, your searches would be different than somebody else near you. And that's because, as we've talked about, the cookies, the algorithms, everything interact with what you've been searching, your entire previous history of searches, and mixed with everybody who's similar to you's searches, and the predictive elements of what you're actually thinking you're looking for. But everybody's is their own. Nobody has their own unique space. Regardless of that, though, we still fit within our own little spheres. Sometimes education is designed specifically to break you out of those little bubbles, to get you out of what Eli Pariser calls the filter bubble. Because what he says is that the internet doesn't have an information problem, it has a filter problem. And that means that the ability for us to curate needs to start before we get to the curation point. In other words, when we're learning how to use the internet or interact with social media, we shouldn't learn how to curate in real time. We should be given media literacies or internet literacies previous to that moment to teach us how filtering even operates, because the true literacies of the internet and how to actually read the web come from understanding it as a holistic platform, a space. So 3 things I think I want to talk about today is what is the long-term after effects of social media and all of our change? What are some of the things that I've talked about or hinted to during the first parts of the semester and where we're going with those? So of course I'm going to cover some NFT stuff in this one, climate change, and of course movements, because that's where we are at the end of the semester. How do digital movements even interact with? So I think I'll go in the order that I've written my notes, which is understanding social media as a place to connect with other people and share media in a social space. In other words, when we say social media, we're talking about media that is socialized. When you have media, like a billboard, your social interaction with that is a consumer behavior of seeing, becoming aware, potentially creating a want and a desire, and fulfilling that need through consumerism. That's a media that seems to one to many. Social media is many to many. Each of us are our own producers as well as consumers, what Henry Jenkins calls a prosumer. And so prosuming is the ability to be a producer and a consumer at the exact same time. So we're always thinking about how we could either leverage types of media or leverage our ideas into the next space. As many of you have investigated over the last several weeks, how marketing and campaigns do that as well. Trends change, people change, ideas change, and what most people have to do is keep up with that, because if you're sitting within the trend, you're more likely to find successful engagement with your ideas. And what I mean by successful engagement is other people interacting with that media, making it social. Organizing online is difficult. Organizing isn't exactly something that just happens. It is something that requires a spark. It requires something to start, something to cohere, something to be a common thought process behind things. But we also notice that those things are very easy to weaponize. And what I mean by weaponize is that it's very easy for somebody to misinterpret some sort of information and cohere very easily things that aren't exactly great for our future. I mean, look at the insurrection. The insurrection on January 6th was basically a result of many disparate groups finding one specific place to believe in a big lie about something and cohering a movement to go raid a place to stall something that was unstallable in the long run, potentially would have led to extreme violence, potentially even death. We really should consider how lucky we really were at the end of that we didn't see something more horrific and tragic on live television. But how did those people get there? What made them want to do that? Well, those are social media movements. And those types of social media movements are done by people believing, having something in their heart that makes them believe that they're doing the right thing. Regardless of how we judge what right and wrong may be, social media trains us to kind of think that since other people are doing it, maybe we're on the right track. That is the filter issue that might take place, because there's nobody outside of that is saying, hey, you know what, that's not a good idea, because those types of things are protected by our amendments, which, while social media spans the world, our amendment does work within it. People often do forget that it is a global platform. So movements are isolated but large at the exact same time. So something you feel is big or a big point may not be big in general. For example, only 19% of Facebook's users are in the United States. That might be shocking. So when you think about how much sway the United States has on Facebook, it's not as much as you think, because look at just populations and you can see the statistical analysis of any of that. So when you think about a movement, how many millions of human beings need to be involved with some sort of movement or ideology for something to shift the discourse? These are thoughts. These aren't really things that tell us what's going to be right or wrong, how movements operate and what they do. But what we could see is that certain movements do have scale. And so like the Black Lives Matter movement, let's talk about that. That is a solely social media driven movement that became a physical movement that has made bigger changes, potentially bigger changes in the last decade than many other movements have at any other given time, because of its ability to spread its knowledge so rapidly. Black Lives Matter ranges from the very, very unusable movements like Blackout Tuesday, which was on June 2nd of last year, which really didn't do anything. By putting black squares, by using the Black Lives Matter hashtag, it actually caused people to not find good information that may have been necessary during a protest. And all it did was make something called collectivism. Collectivism is the belief that you're actually taking some sort of action, that you're being some sort of activist, when really all you're doing is using clicks. You're thinking the shares. While this isn't homework, I do encourage you to go all the way back in time to Coney 2012, a viral video phenomenon, that's the term we use for that. In 2012, that was a 30-minute viral video that encouraged people to make a warlord famous so that we could capture him. Somewhere deep in there may have been a good idea, but really what it was designed to do was sell packets. It was designed to sell products and make the Jason Russell, the creator, somewhat richer during that process. That type of movement was a very small blip on the radar, but its framework plays forward into our future because what we start doing then is creating the contrast between collectivists, people who believe they're participating because they're sharing something, and activists, people who actually are taking place in, whether it be digital activism, called OSINT, open source information and intelligence, searching, learning, growing, or direct action, the ability to protest, go out into the fields, stand up to one another, show your voice, and defend your First Amendment rights. I had a discussion about this the other day, about somebody asking about what was the role of protest nowadays, like knowing that if you go out, you could get arrested, you could get in trouble. And I explained that protest is not for everybody, but your First Amendment rights protect that. It is under the part called peaceably assemble. It's one of the 5 rights of your First Amendment. And when you peaceably assemble, you have to remember what it is designed specifically to show what you do, what your constituencies are. When you say you believe in something, it's hard to show your belief in it using numbers online. Those can be faked by bots, it can be faked by shares, but you can't fake in-person space. When you go down to public and people see the mass amount, that becomes a knowledge of you. This is why it's protected, of you believing in something that also is believed by many others, because you're physically taking up space. The ability to physically take up space is a power. That's power. Remember that first, all your amendments are against the government. So they're to protect you from the government, okay? They're freedoms from the government. That's what you're supposed to have. But it is a use it or lose it type of thing. If you don't consistently use your First Amendment rights or your rights in general, they can be changed or shifted because it doesn't seem like anybody's believing in them. But also remember that protests themselves is just a piece of how many rights you have and what you can do with that voice. And so these are different ways of taking direct action. So again, back to Black Lives Matter. Arguably, what recently occurred in the Derek Chauvin case would not have happened without Black Lives Matter. And I don't mean the guilty verdict. A guilty verdict is taken down by your peers, by the jurors, people of many of your other amendments and your rights, the 6 amendments in particular. But when you have, it's very possible, or arguably possible, that if there was no Black Lives Matter protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder, that the case may not have been brought to trial, or charges may not have been placed. Awareness and outrage become visible en masse, by actual First Amendment rights. These movements become larger, they become more scalable, and when you get it big enough, it becomes reality. And that's when people start cracking through the old world, understanding that the world progresses no matter what. We can't stop progress. You can't stop it. Things arc that way. You could impede on it, like the insurrection, but you can not stop the way it works, because eventually time goes forward no matter what. And so understanding how things go opens conversations. And this is where social media is both great and not great. Because social media gives us the ability to start new conversations, bring up new ideas, share them with others who may never have heard them before. However, without the ability to have veracity, truth checks, fact checking in real time, you can pretty much just say anything you want. And that brings me to my really most important thing of this. Not that there's actually, I wouldn't say it's most important, it's just another important bit. Climate change. So I probably brought this up before, and if I haven't, I'm an environmental humanist. That means that beyond all of my media studies, credentials, and my degrees, is that climate change plays a big role in my pedagogy and my research. And that's because, as I recently saw a tweet, the tweet said, every journalist should be a climate journalist. And I think that's important. I think as we go into the 2020s, 2030s, and 2040s, we're going to be seeing a lot more very rapid changes in our climate, as you've probably already seen in many spaces all over the world. In other words, it is an actual real thing, as well as structural racism and structural inequality, that is happening. And we need to be talking about it, and we need to make it clear. But I just want to show you what happens when we talk about the possibility of misinformation. So a few years ago, Leonardo DiCaprio created a film called Before the Flood. And it was based on the ideas of how the Paris Agreement would work, the Paris Accords. How would we actually commit to climate change? How would we actually commit to making things less bad for the future? Because we're now at, I think, last I checked, 415 or 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide. It's the first time human beings ever, as a species, we have ever encountered carbon dioxide in the atmosphere this much. Ever. As literally ever. The last time was pre-humankind. When carbon dioxide is this high in the atmosphere, it creates chaos in our environment. It takes approximately 5,000 years to reset. So that's not good. So we should really start understanding that when we cross that 350 parts per million line a while back, we started going into something that could end up becoming a feedback loop. So what the Paris Accord has attempted to do is try to slow that down to 1 to 2 degrees Celsius of temperature increase. If we could slow down the temperature increase, we could potentially slow down the ice sheets from melting. And remember, inside the ice sheets, we forget that not only are ice sheets, you know, huge chunks of ice where you only see on top, miles of ice underneath that, like an ice cube, will eventually melt and raise the water, because what's floating above the water will push down and create higher things, offsetting our entire cycle, our jet streams, offsetting the streams inside the ocean, and everything becomes unpredictable. So weather changes and it becomes climate change. That's literally what it means. But inside of the ice is actually captured gas from our previous time. So last time methane and carbon dioxide were that high, it had weight and it settled in the ice and it froze over. So as the ice melts, it actually releases more gases, thereby creating a feedback effect that's even faster. So it's basically, when they summarize that, it's like a little at a time and then all at once. And so that's unfortunately coming sooner than we think, but we can mitigate it, we can slow it down. One of the ideas of the Paris climate change was, if we make small changes, just very small changes, we could start considering how to mitigate or slow down some of these changes. And one of them was reduce meat consumption, because larger than all the cars in all the world that are driving, methane from cows, their farts, are literally causing climate change because of mass production of meat. Literally, our McDonald's obsession has caused climate change to an extent that is unparalleled for all of times in all of history, more than the Industrial Revolution. So in order to think about the future and protect it, you'd want to consider just reducing your intake, not eliminating, but reducing. And of course, if you were to eliminate completely, you'd be doing quite a service. However, the news goes crazy with this because people spread misinformation and say things that are vastly untrue. So recently, this idea was weaponized by the far right, which was then taken into Congress by people who thought that Biden was banning burgers. He never said it. It's just not true. He said he was going to take into some of the accounts of some of the things that we could do to mitigate it into the plan that might be part of a Green New Deal, or might be part of a climate change plan. But all you need is one article from the Daily Mail UK to tie one idea to something Biden said by making a connection that never existed, and all of a sudden becomes a talking point. And as we talked about during our extremist lecture, we have a reactionary standpoint. Reactions make money. They always have. Just like when the Fine brothers tried to copyright the idea of react videos. React videos are what make people more likely to engage with content. When we see reactions, it's what people react to. Just like the baby in the face on Teletubbies, to the scenes in Fight Club when you see people wincing, violence in reactions is actually more potent than actually seeing the thing itself, because we understand people more than anything else. So reactions are what people are trying to do. Politicians should not be engaging in this type of social media. They should not be engaging in shitposting. They should not be engaging in reactionary stances. But this is what we've come to because it's enabled by the megaphones, the tools that we're allowed to broadcast from. And because we're enabled to do so, if I were a typical politician and I were be a reactionary, I probably wouldn't get much coverage. But if social media rewards my reactionary stance, I'm obviously going to engage with it, because analytically, my metrics show me that I'm getting more engagement based on those reactions in social media space than in the meat space. Because in IRL, being able to talk that way probably wouldn't get me as much engagement. I'd be looked at as a kook. But COVID has put us in these boxes. Here we are inside this box, this video screen, this two-dimensional space of sharing. And by doing that, we've reduced humanism and we've connected to each other digitally. Now our words are just part of the formula, part of the algorithm, part of the system. And we've got to stop doing that. We've got to connect with one another. So it always makes me nervous that we've been facilitated of these systems too easily. These shouldn't be easy. These shouldn't be accessible as much. We should know more about how they operate. And that brings me to the last bits here. And I know this is going quite long, but it's pretty important. The 3 ways of looking at things in the future and why we have to understand them. There is the ways of making change. First, there's pessimism. It's very easy to be pessimist. Always. I would even say it's very easy to be cosmically pessimist. Cosmically pessimist is like, we're doomed. And by saying we're doomed, you just kind of say, shrug your arms and say, let the next people deal with it. But that's what everybody has been doing, and we can't let the next deal with it. We have to deal with it now. This is now it. There's no more time or space for cosmic pessimism. On the more pointed front, pessimism is easy in social media. The film The Social Dilemma is problematic to me. We haven't talked about it in this class, nor did I assign it, because I don't really like it. I don't like it because it's a pessimist film. It uses the same tools, virality, reactionary stances, inside information, to tell the story about why social media is broken. So when you have Tristan Harris, who basically invented the systems that broke us, using those same tools to make his movie tell that story, it's not that great. Now, mind you, there's great actors, not great actors, well, there are great actors in it. There are great people speaking in that. Joe Toscano is one of my favorite people around. He runs a really great system called Beacon, which tries to get us to be much more aware of the way that information privacy works online. However, I don't like the way the documentary had portrayed a lot of the systems in which we storytell, because it makes us think there's not much we could do about it. And that's pessimist. There's realism. There's a film on Netflix now that you should watch. Here's a Coded Bias. I think this is a really good film. Coded Bias is basically a story about how algorithms were written, who wrote them, and why they're biased from their inception. It's a really good film, and it actually investigates Timnit Gebru's exit from Google when she became the whistleblower to some of the privacy issues that were occurring inside the site. I think it's a really good film. If you want to go really out there and really want to have a brain day, you should also check out Adam Curtis's 7-hour documentary on YouTube called I Can't Get You Out of My Head. Seriously, it's an excellent suggestion. It's basically a history of conspiracy theories and paranoia, how we got to now. Adam Curtis draws in these huge big ideas and brings them in. If you watch it all at once, it's going to change your life. But that's a bigger version of realism. I prefer to think optimistically, and this is where we're going to end with this one. We need to be, in this point, optimistic about a lot. NFTs are easy to think about as pessimistic or exciting or objects of digital demand. An NFT is very complicated, and I'm going to tell you why in the terms of why I'm going to frame this optimistically. I think NFTs are a trend, and I think they're a trend because an NFT, if we haven't spoken about it, is a digital object, whether it be an image, a tweet, or whatever, that's been gassed or minted on the Ethereum blockchain. The blockchain is basically an inventory. It's a tag, a unique tag on a long line, and then it's stored on a server. Once it's permanently stored, an NFT is created. It's a non-fungible token. It's a non-fakeable receipt. Think of it that way. It's a real receipt for it. It then creates a provenance. Anybody who buys that token sees it's open. So you can see every person who's ever purchased that token in all of its history. In a positive sense, or optimistic sense, it helps small artists get their work out, because now they actually, where they had no access to the arts industries, the digital arts industries allow them to actually have access to it. It could then give them some sort of credit or provenance. The ability to have people purchasing your art gives your art reality. However, by storing it on the Ethereum blockchain means you use electricity to store it. Those servers have to be stored, they have to be constantly kept on, and there's no such thing as clean energy. There's just no such thing. Electricity comes from one of very few places. You're burning coal to create heat, to create steam, to spin turbines. You're burning oil to create heat, to spin turbines. Occasionally you come across really good green energy, water, wind, solar, but there's all these extra parts. At this current moment, it's very possible that all the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and blockchain information is using more electricity at this current moment than all the green energy that we're actually producing at any moment. In other words, all green energy is offset by just crypto markets. That could feel cosmically pessimistic. But I want to say this in a positive way. If we are aware of these shifts, and if we are aware of how this is happening, then it isn't time for us to be doom and gloom. It isn't time for us to be like, oh shit, there's just nothing we could do about it. What we really need to do is talk to one another. We need to connect with one another closer. We need to have conversations, and we need to speak things through. This version of this class is not effective. I speak to you, you listen, but it's not really a conversation. This would work far better in a conversational way. My Zoom door is always open, and someday I hope to meet you guys in real life. We could always talk in real time, which I think would be really helpful. But what I really think is important is you take this information from this class and you talk to people about it. You let them know that NFTs may not be a long-term thing, but it is exciting in the moment, and to maybe think about it in terms of what it can do for artists rather than what it can't do for the future of art or what it can't do for the future of the earth. Maybe it's time to just say, well, what do we think of next? What can we be with social media in its next iteration? What does the next iteration look like? I don't know. And somebody who's studied it for well over 15 years at this point, I don't think I know what comes next. What I do know, though, is people are very interested in how to think about the earth in relation to social media. And I think that makes me excited, because what most important to me in terms of NFTs is the fact that it's brought up the conversation of climate change. So whatever that may be, or however we may have interacted with NFTs up to now, at least we're talking about it. And at the very least, if we're talking about it, we could potentially make change about things. And so when Black Lives Matter becomes exciting, it creates conversation. Sure, there's reactionaries on everything that will ever exist, people who will profit off of the grift, people who will be literally grifters, make an entire career on just reactions. But they're not long-term. You can't react forever. At a certain point, the reactions become reality. A reality becomes too big for reactions to even exist, and then you become part of the very small, yelling and screaming people on the side with the boards around your body, yelling the world will end. If you're yelling about the world ending, you should turn around and try to figure out how to stop the world from ending. You shouldn't just be standing there and doing it. Collectively, we can do that. Collectively, if we learn enough from each other, connect with enough of each other, and learn to make sure that we are part of a bigger system together on this organism that is Earth, we could start thinking about how to talk about the systems that connect us, the digital ones, the ones that exist in the electricity, the ones that exist beyond the clicks. And then we start seeing each other for who we are as human beings and people to people. Social media should just be that, social media. It should be ways for media to communicate with each other. But that's up for all of us to design. That's the future of what's actually down the road, and we have to figure that out together. So, this long lecture basically concludes with saying there's no homework this week, but I want you to start thinking about your final project. And the final project is going to be about what comes next. How do we engage with optimism? What are we together going to do, and what can we start thinking about? Your final project is a creative project. As said in the syllabus at the beginning, it can be an essay, it could be a vlog, or it can be a digital project like a presentation. And it's going to be not that long. I'll give more specific rubric as we're coming up. I'd rather you catch up with some of the work this week, and I know that other classes are putting probably your final projects together as well, and I don't want you to be overburdened. But if you start thinking now about what comes next and how we can make the changes of the future, that's the basic of that rubric. You're going to have to act like we did a few weeks ago as the expert on this one. Like how you're going to talk to somebody who's never taken this class. How do we communicate with people who are curious about social media? Things that they should know about. Very similar to the midterm in which you analyzed an article, but in this case, it's free form. It's not an article. It's going to be you. You're the expert now. You've spent 3 months learning this. What should other people know and why? Think about it. No homework this week for that, but I just want you to start thinking about these different aspects of what it is. And I want you to be aware that there's a lot of changes. So the last little bit, a cute little note, which I'm going to leave in the Substack as well inside our newsletter. I think I got to see something that was really interesting in terms of cohering something that happens from a digital space to a real life space. And it's easier to explain in the Substack, so it'll be in there. But I don't know if you saw the battle of the Joshes and the new Josh being deemed the best Josh. But there was at one point a viral thread and a little bit of a viral trend of people finding the people who had their same name on the internet. And there was these Joshes. And all these Joshes got into one Facebook group. And by the end of this Facebook group, Josh, one of the Joshes, dared all the Joshes to meet at a very specific point on April 24th, 2021 in a field and fight it out to be who would be the one true Josh. And a new Josh was named. It was a young man named Josh. And he became the new Josh. And what's cute about that is that it's optimistic. It shows us that there are ways of using social media positively and showing people that we can use the medium to connect to human beings to make something better than the Area 51 raid, but to actually bring people into a physical space, enjoy it temporarily, and think about people who might be the future. Maybe I'm thinking about it too much. Maybe I'm putting too much weight on something that might have been just silly. But I think it's possible that social media can be used for good. It's just the ways that we have to think about it bigger than the way that the machines want us to think about it. So until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay healthy. And again, if you ever want to connect, just let me know.